Okay, we are recording. This is the
Cool.
dApp's developer group. Go ahead, Ned.
Hey, Ed. So I just said we're waiting for Chris Boscolo. He was coming to start doing a deep dive into the RChain API. So let me send him a message. Just give me a sec here.
That will be good to have. RChain, NetZipper, you want to tell us about your dApp development ambitions?
I would like to try to do some dApp development, but yet had no time for do that. But I am trying to do something with testnet with all that deploy architecture. So wanna dive into the API way to interact with the node.
Hey, Rich.
Hi guys, how are you doing?
Hey, Rich.
Hi Ned. I caught some sun today, I don't know if you can tell.
I'm posting the link to the RChain API in the chat window for those who want to take a look at it and didn't see the previous link.
Thank you.
And Dan had told me he had done some work on the docs recently. So I haven't heard from Chris. So let's see. So, hey, Ed, have you used the RChain API at all, or?
I haven't. I've looked at the code and been inspired by pieces of it to do what I need to do on the Scala.js side.
Okay.
We're using the same cryptographic library. I've now drawn a blank of tweet NACL.js, I think it is, and the same hashing library. So I looked at some of the code, how it's used in those areas.
Okay, cool. Is that the Blake 2B256 hash or the
that
KCAC
one?
256?
The Blake 2B256 one.
Blake 2B, cool. All right. Well, you know, I haven't done any development work recently, and so I'm not familiar with this. So I'm not really the one to kind of go over it at all. Oh, okay, let's see. Crystal, okay, let's see. He's having some technical difficulties with his computer. So let me email him.
Can I ask a quick question while we're waiting?
Sure.
Thanks. So these hashes, is this to do with elliptic curve theory and security keys?
Yes.
You mentioned 256 hash. I'm just wondering what we're talking about.
You're correct.
Thank you. I thought I was, which means I kind of know where to look. I don't know the details yet. Thank you.
Yeah, just the two places that particular hashing is used is it's used to create the rev address currently. So the private key starts with a random number. It goes through a cryptographic curve to create the private key. And it goes through a cryptographic curve to create a public key. And then the public key goes through an algorithm that includes like 2B256 to generate a rev address. So that's one path that it's used in. And then the other path that it's used in is the cryptographic signing could sign, the entire deployment message, but as a convention and for speed, it signs a hash of the deploy message instead. And so that's the other place that hash algorithm's used. Hey, Chris.
Thanks so much, Ed.
Hey, Chris.
Hey guys, sorry I'm late. I clicked upgrade on my OS 10 install and it took a half hour instead of the 15 minutes it said. So
Ooh.
anyway, what did I miss?
We just started talking. Richard asked a question to Ed about the cryptographic algorithm, and then I posted in the chat a link to the API docs that Dan Connolly has recently updated.
How recent? Did he update those?
He said recently.
Okay.
So he just said he just did it. He didn't give a date.
April 14th. It's like, yeah, it's gonna get reviewed.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So good. So when we do release Node with the changes to the crypto algs, we'll have to update it one more time, or he will have to, or someone will have to.
Right. So do you want to do like a overview or introduction?
Well, so actually, you tell me. I don't have a lot of context for what you wanted to go over on this call. I was so I assumed I would be answering a bunch of questions, but I'm happy to. I guess, can you set the stage for how much you guys have talked about thus far and what you guys want to get out of this time? Can you hear me?
Yeah. So you guys are the devs, so
okay, let me I had a conversation with Greg about the RChain API, and Greg really wants this to be community developed. In other words, the RChain API, which is the JavaScript module for interacting with RChain, is well, just that, a JavaScript way to interact with the RChain node. And in my conversation with Greg on Monday, he really wants to see community involvement and community ownership of this tool, which is why it's not part of the dev deliverables. I happen to know about it because I've used it quite a bit, so let me first ask a question. How many people on this call are actually doing dApp development? I can't see everybody at once, so you gotta. I see
Yeah.
Ed raised his hand. Ed, Jim.
Rich isn't. So I'm a newbie, and I'm trying to understand the maths behind RChain and row lining and
Okay.
do correct by construction properly, rather than app dev. But I'm definitely interested to learn about app dev. Thanks.
And so, how many of you are actually using RChain API?
Not me. Yeah.
What are you using, Ed?
I'm using the protobufs compiled to, or I guess I don't know what you call it, cross-compiled to Scala.js, and then Scala.js the rest of the way.
So you're speaking native protobuf to the node.
Yeah, the protobuf, there's something called gRPC web that generates the stubs needed in Scala JS.
Got it. How about you, Jim?
Right now, we're just using the calls to the command line. That's what I proposed.
Okay, so you're actually writing code and deploying it through the command line.
Well, through Robot. Robot has a RChain API interface that was broken about a year ago, and it hasn't been fixed yet. So, is
that? But is Robot
system
calling? Is Robot calling rnode and doing things over a command line?
Yeah, it makes a system call right now.
Okay, got it.
The RChain API code that's in Robot is broken.
Okay, so nobody on this call then is actually using the JavaScript bridge to the gRPC interface that's called RChain API. Is that correct?
Yep.
I'm going to take that as a no. Oh, okay, that's really good data for me because one of the things that Greg asked for is, part of what we're trying to establish is, should we bring RChain API as an API for interacting with RChain into being a dev deliverable? I think I saw Kelly's on this call, so that's a good data point for us, Kelly.
Yeah, agreed.
So then really there's two ways that you're using it. Robot's using the command line, and that will always be available to you. And we are, in fact, we're going to be making some enhancements to the rnode command line usage, so that you can actually generate your key pairs and store them in a encrypted file that rnode can access. And so you'll be able to use password access for unlocking that key pair and signing your deploys and sending them to the chain. So that's stuff that's ticketed. I expect we should see that, if not the end of this sprint, but maybe the end of next sprint. Kelly, keep me honest if that's not accurate.
I would agree. In the end of
okay.
the sprint.
So then I guess my next question then is, since nobody's using the RChain API, we talked a little bit about the command line version. We'll update the docs so you have full docs on the command line version. For you, Ed, that are using the gRPC interface, can you speak to what did you find lacking? And documentation could be on that list. What do you wish to see improved?
Well, I think there's two gRPC paths. Two gRPC. No, I'm sorry, backing up here a little bit. I have to do a little education in my response too. Okay, so from a web browser, web browsers have trouble talking gRPC directly because of the headers and tailors that they put on. So I have a Envoy proxy that's between the web browser and an rnode, and that takes care of the headers and tailors, and it can also do clustering and some other things. So that's one thing that's missing from a web app perspective.
Yeah.
And then, because ideally the web app would talk directly to the rnode. I believe in the case of RChain API, it runs on Node.js, so essentially a server that's also going to be in the middle between a web client and the rnode. If I understand correctly, I'm not 100% on that.
Well, you mean the Dan Conley RChain API?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is, it doesn't start a server or anything. It's basically JavaScript code, client code, that allows you to build an app in JavaScript, and it constructs the protobufs to talk to RChain over gRPC, or the node over gRPC.
Right, but it doesn't it run in Node.js, and so it doesn't run all in the browser?
No, there's no, well, it does, two different questions. It doesn't require Node.js. Whether the whole thing can run in a browser or not is a good question. I don't know if it has dependencies that don't run in the browser, because I don't think so, but it might. Like, I don't know if the gRPC libraries end up making it not work from a browser. In fact,
Okay.
as I think about that, it probably doesn't. It probably won't work in a browser, because it might have.
Yeah, I thought it required Node.js and some process between the browser and our node. And it could be.
So one thing that we talked about at the Poland retreat was building a WebSocket interface to Node that spoke JSON instead of gRPC.
Mm-hmm.
And that would give pure browser capability communication to the node. Is that something that this community, you guys would be in favor of, or?
Absolutely. There's some capability to convert between JSON and protobuf in Dan's RChain API, but certainly that would be, from the app developer point of view, that would be ideal.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with WebSockets, but either WebSockets or JSON, RESTful JSON.
Yeah, and I guess I shouldn't have said WebSocket, because it could technically be JSON RESTful. It doesn't need to be WebSocket.
Yeah.
It's just it's one of those things where you kind of get either one of those paths is the same. All of the plumbing is pretty much the same with the tools.
Okay. I wanted to add a few other comments about your earlier question.
Please do.
And the so in RChain API does have at least 2 clients built on top that Dan and Joshi built. One is the beginnings of a command line wallet, and the other one is a signer similar to like a lightweight MetaMask, which are both great projects to, if not that specific code, that kind of those applications are important for the ecosystem. So those are things that could evolve as well.
Okay, thanks for bringing that up, Ed. So what we will have at the end of the next sprint will be I think, buttoned up node client to do that, but we'll not have, what we won't have is any client side libraries that makes generating key pairs and signing deploys or anything easy to do. And so this is an area where I want to really, I'm not going to tell you guys what we're doing there on this call. I want to get information from you to help us make the right decisions, because my sense is that most people will be building clients in JavaScript, probably in the browser, but also, even on mobile apps or whatever. A lot of mobile app developers, other than you, Ed, are using React, which is JavaScript, and so.
Yeah, I'm using React.js actually. And
are you? Well, I know you got some Scala going on in there because you're just masochistic. But so that's my sense, is that that's the right direction for us to go. We should, in other words, cleaning up the probably RChain API to do the key manipulation and signing of deploys, and having that be sort of the go-to client for people to use when interfacing with RChain. Does that seem reasonable for you guys?
Yeah, for me, having a web extension as a signer for those developing for web makes a lot of sense. It doesn't have to do, everything beyond key management. It can just sign deployments or help the client sign deployments. And looking at sort of MetaMask's path is an interesting one. The JavaScript in the browser app needs to explicitly invoke MetaMask, where before MetaMask was kind of implicitly listening to everything.
Right.
But I think it has a choice whether MetaMask does the deployment to Infura in their case, or whether the browser app handles it. Is kind of a choice of the application. But I think having a sort of a minimal MetaMask-like signer would be quite valuable. And I thought of taking the Diggin wallet that direction instead of just the browser app. And then what was your other question? On mobile, I don't know enough about how like a standalone mobile signer would work, but assuming there's a URI that you could invoke on mobile to fire up another app for authentication, that would be great too. I just don't know the mobile ecosystem well enough to suggest the right architecture.
Well, for the mobile side, I suspect that I won't say most, a lot of mobile's written in either React or some technology based on JavaScript, and then the rest of them are combo of iOS native, which is whatever, Objective-C or Swift, and then the Android side, which I believe most people are still building Android stuff in Java. I don't know. That's a good question. But it would be straightforward to build the client-side versions of that JavaScript library in those languages based on the JavaScript as a reference. So I don't think we necessarily need to build those clients, but the community, if they want to build those apps, could add those clients to the community ecosystem. That would be really awesome. So what I'm hearing from this call is there's a little bit of desire to see from you, Ed, like the signing and key management that's in RChain API sort of polished and maintained. My objective is to make sure that RChain API stays in sync with Node, and so I'm going to beg, borrow, and steal Dan's time as much as we possibly can to get that to happen. And then if Dan is unable to keep it up to sync, then either I can do it or Kelly. I don't know. Maybe we can borrow a few some hours from some of our devs. But that's the plan thus far. Any questions or concerns from anybody on that?
Not really concerns. I'm happy to hear that. I know Joshi made a number of demonstration apps using the API.
Oh yeah. My impression going into this call was that most dApp development was using the RChain API. I knew Ed. I forgot the fact that you did the Scala Envoy stuff. But I actually thought you were using the RChain API as well. So I'm kind of, it is interesting to hear that's not quite as much RChain API going on as I thought, but also I know there are other projects that were building on RChain back in the fall that are no longer really a part of the community, or at least I haven't seen them around in a long time. So I'm not sure if they would come back on board and finish up their projects or not.
Yeah. So, hey, Chris, well, actually, one thing, Ed, I'd like to ask you a question, which is if you were starting all over again, would you go down the same development route, or would you like
well, I definitely wouldn't have gone down Scala.js route, but and I would have picked a more popular stack that developers were readily available, and Angular and TypeScript are the stacks that are more popular. But I think in either case, with the Diggin architecture and with what I understand the RChain API is, they require this component in between the ultimate client and the RChain node, which is problematic. And so it's problematic because there's could be a man in the middle attack going on in any of those cases. So we want to reduce that by providing sort of natively in at least in the same kit. It could be an option of whoever's installing an RChain node that make it client accessible. And so that would include browser clients, and unfortunately it's not there. So for my architecture, that's pretty simple. You just stand up an Envoy node. It's a small YAML file to configure it, and it's up and running. But it's not RESTful. There is another architecture that Jack Mills, who is on contract, or he was considered being put on contract, I think like last August or July or something. There's another way to configure the Envoy proxy so that it does provide RESTful APIs, I think, using gets and posts. But I didn't explore that further, but I have some documentation on it.
Yeah, I believe he was working on that but that's back in the fall when I spoke to him about that.
Yeah, so our direction that we want to go is to migrate the client usage of our node, and by client I mean the in the TCP sense of the word. So the thing that's connecting to our node, we want to migrate that to instead of being gRPC based, making it either RESTful or WebSocket with JSON, so that it's much more browser friendly. And that would remove what you're talking about, Ed. No more middle there doesn't need to be a server in the middle between you and our node. But I do want to point out that R node that's sitting there is itself not doesn't necessarily need to be a validator, right?
Right.
And in fact, most people probably won't connect to a validator directly. So there is the idea of the man in the middle that you're talking about, Ed, is it's not as big of a concern as other than maybe actually it's not really as big of a concern as you might think, because the signing of all your deploys happens on the client. So there's no way, the only thing the man in the middle could do is sort of deny you the ability to do things on chain.
Right, or
they couldn't manipulate it.
Yeah, they could monitor your IP address and
yeah, absolutely
correlation to that or something like that. But yeah, I agree. It's mostly privacy.
There's another way that clients could be built, which is to essentially run the R node as a client locally, right? That's watching the chain and seeing updates and having just talking directly to R node, not over a TCP socket, but well, I guess still might be over, but it could be within the same host as opposed to over a network. That's kind of the way that I thought people would ultimately end up using RChain, but in the early days, probably not. But I envision that that's the way people would ultimately interact with it, because then you can run basically R node against your local, Rolang against your local R node, and test out things before you launch them to the chain. So that's kind of the way that I envisioned people would use it over time, but that's not the way you can really use it today.
So in the case when you're running an R node that's not a validator, you would still propose to a validator?
You don't propose,
You
but
did-
what you do is you always get an active, up-to-date version of the blockchain. So anything you ask of that node, you're getting what the blockchain's because it's receiving up the blocks, right?
Right.
So so the deploys still have to be signed and sent to a validator,
Right.
and the validators do the proposes.
Now, Tomislav made this update, which allowed, he made two rather cool updates, I guess, to the Powerbox capability. One was HTTP, and the other one was Protobuf, where you could send between nodes. I mean, I guess the idea that you might be able to send to a channel deploys directly from your Roland code might be.
Yeah. He described that on I was on the testnet call last Thursday, and he was describing that. And that was the first time I've ever heard of such an endeavor. It is definitely interesting. I don't know. I guess I would ask this question to this group of people, because ultimately, Jim, help make sure I don't misrepresent this. My understanding of what that allows you to do is write in Rolang the ability to have client-side code interact with the blockchain. So basically, your Rolang has the ability to go out, and your local Rolang code has the ability to go out and execute stuff on chain and get results, right?
Yeah, I think that was the intention. I don't know how far he got with it.
I was, to be honest, that was a really interesting idea. I'd never heard that before, because I guess I didn't realize there would be people that would want to do that. That we don't have any plans to support that specifically, at least in the near future. If that's something people really want, then we can explore that. But that, like I said, that was the first time I heard that. So I know we don't have nothing that I know on our dev roadmap that would help make that easier.
It seemed
One of the other
that could be part of the sharding solution as well, and
yeah.
And having channels local to a shard.
Yep. Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. That's interesting thought space, Jim. Go ahead.
Sorry, Chris. If I've understood that right, and it's quite possible I haven't, I'm very interested in this kind of suggestion, but I think there's almost a dichotomy between what we're talking about with Ed, with the sort of like ubiquitous tools of web development. You know, that's what's going to bring developers to the community. And so I guess at this stage, from a growing community point of view, I would agree with the RChain API taking precedence as discussed. But from a personal point of view, from what little research I've done the last week and being drawn to RChain because of Rolang and because of all the maths behind what Greg's doing, and because I think it's the way we should be writing programs, I would love to see this sort of thing developed alongside it as well, because I think that's how we get Rolang out there and experimented with by developers. I don't know if I'm right, but I'm thinking they're two parallel paths, and it'd be great to see both, but possibly with different initial use cases.
Yeah, I agree with you, Rich. The challenge for us obviously is bandwidth on that second parallel path, at least in the near future.
Mm-hmm.
But I totally agree, especially as Jim pointed out, with regards to like sharding, there's some interesting things that come out of that that having the ability to basically write quote unquote client Rolang would be I think made possible, or would make sharding possible in a lot using all of just Rolang tools. But that's the first time I'm contemplating this, so I might be jumping to wrong conclusions.
Yeah. Again, from what little research I've done this last week, I've tried to read Greg's 2005 paper, and I could certainly read more around it, but there'd be a lot to read around because it's written for experts. But it seems to me at the moment, and it's almost a question I've got for yourself and Kelly, see whether I'm right, but it seems to me that Rolang, there's a grand vision behind Rolang which I really like, which is all developers should use it or a better version of it 10 years down the line because it's the right way to write software. But separately, it's almost like we're taking it for RChain and using it to do the things that standard programming languages, this stuff that, building a blockchain is not easy. Building a scalable blockchain is very much not easy. And my question for you really would be, am I right in presuming that the use case for Rolang at the moment really is Casper proof of stake to enable correct by construction software development and to help deliver the RChain blockchain, rather than to be used as a dApp programming language, which I perhaps thought it was 2 weeks ago? Would you have any comments on that?
What if I said it this way? The correct by construction building of dApps is ultimately what we're heading toward. The current release doesn't have the type system that we need to get full correct by construction dApps built, but this Mercury release is the stepstone toward that. So once we have that, then you can have true dApps built with using correct by construction constructs. Does that?
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, very much. That's very clear, and exactly that. I would love to see RChain be a platform, sort of middleware type platform that starts pushing that. And I think if we can get it out there, that will grow a community. But it's going to be slow because it's going to be hard to attract people to it because there is a learning curve. So, but
yes.
if we could get it built in, brilliant. I think it's not for me to decide. I just wanted to make it quite clear what that dichotomy was. I think you guys are much better positioned to take that forward, but it is probably of relevance to say it's an important point.
And that, just so you know, Rich, that release has a name. It's called Venus. So you might hear that if you're on the community calls.
I've heard of Mercury and Venus, but what specifically do you mean by
Venus,
that release?
Venus is what brings in the other language features that allows full correct by construction dApps to be built.
I have one comment about that. Dan's work and some of the stuff that's been happening with the behavioral typing in the computational calculus group has been making some headway in typing for Rolang, and it occurred to me that since this is all compile time working, that independently the behavioral typing could be done to deploy safe programs on Mercury. Am I wrong there?
Interesting. Jim, so first of all, I can't answer that. one thing that you guys should know about my background is not on the behavioral type system part of the project, like all of that side of it. You guys probably are more advanced in your learning on that than I am. So I can't speak too much to that. I don't know what work Dan did there. So I can't really speak too much to that.
Hey, Rich, I wanted to comment also on your perceptions and questions about Rolang and you know, a year or so ago, I also had the perception and that Rolang was going to be a big barrier to adoption, and it is a barrier, but it's actually not the biggest one. So you know, a lot of dApp development is beyond what's in Rolang and what you deploy as a smart contract or interacting with smart contracts. And so if you look at the Ethereum ecosystem, for example, many of them have fairly simple smart contracts written in Solidity. And most of the app development is in sort of more traditional web development or mobile development, and how to connect that with the node. In the case of Ethereum, for example, they build out the Infura infrastructure to help with that connection and journey. So what I think is going to repeat itself for RChain is it's those other things beyond Rolang that are going to be the bigger challenge. And there are some Rolang features that are beyond sort of the type system that just make things easy for development, like, you know, string manipulation, type libraries, date time facilities, and all kinds of other things that are beyond sort of the basic language issues. And so there's, let's call them what would be traditionally called a library that will present some challenges, the absence of those. So yes, Rolang is a challenge, but I wouldn't say it's the largest challenge in attracting developers. It's these reference architectures, making it easy to connect to nodes, samples, and those kinds of things.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ed. And on that note, you know, even just the tooling for debugging the Rolang, and that was another thing that we talked a little bit about at the dev retreat in Poland, about picking some, I won't call it low-hanging fruit, but just some things that we can get on the roadmap really soon to aid in debuggability of Rolang contracts. I mean, it comes in a bunch of different forms. You know, the devs had some really good ideas. Just things about, just as an example, you could deploy your contract and then have the node spit out which I guess channels didn't get matched, so that you have a really good sense of if there are bugs or just logic errors in your code. You can figure some of them out based on what didn't match, but other tools like that. So we have a long way to go to make development on this platform really pleasant for developers, frankly, and so we do have a ways to go there.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, do you know if PyroFX has made any updates to their CryptEffects tool? Because that had some rudimentary debugging in it.
Yeah, I don't think so, but I don't know for sure, Ned. I have no channel of communication with PyroFX. Unfortunately, Kelly dropped off. She would probably know the answer to that question.
Right.
She lives next to him.
Yeah. So I did go up to their website after our last meeting, and there's no real updated information, and I don't believe that was an open source project either. So
yeah, the one other thing before we run out of time here, I wanted to chat a little bit about is there's a couple of this is kind of in the vein, one is in the vein of this debugging conversation, the other is in the vein of just usability. So I'll talk about the debug vein first, which is one of the ideas that came up was to add the equivalent of, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Ethereum and the Ethereum architecture, but in Ethereum, there are these things called events, so that your smart contract can emit events as part of its running code. And so we talked about adding a facility like that so that you could register a channel, basically, that events would be emitted on, that your smart contract could emit as it's functioning. And what that gives you is two things that will allow you to do: wire the events. So first of all, the events would happen like standard out in concept. So they're not stored on the blockchain anywhere, so not bloating the blockchain. But you could build tools off chain to like listen for those events, and build even well, tools to basically listen for those events, and they could potentially become part of the workflow of an app that you're building. So when an event's fired, then your app could be listening for it and get it. So that was one of the things we talked about. The other thing that I want to just talk about is right now, my sense is that the one API that we do have to get data from the chain into the app, which is listen for data at name, is either cumbersome or not really easy to use for developers. And I'm guessing, Ed, you're probably maybe the only one in here that has experienced it, but if anybody else has, do you have any comments about that you want to say?
I missed the question.
Use of listen for data at name.
Yeah, that's where Robot broke.
Yeah, so just to share my experience with it is on a local host. It worked okay. Listen for data at name is a poll. It's not really a listen, and which is I know Chris is aware of this and some talked about some changes, but also since you're often going to be doing the same thing over and over again as a dApp, you want to make sure that let's call those transactions from a client user experience perspective. You have two actions that might invoke the same functionalities and almost identical Rolang to say, I want to pay Alice $10, 10 revs, and I want to pay Bob 10 revs. Well, you want to listen for the responses uniquely from those two. So in my case, I create unique public names to listen back. And it works on my local box on the public testnet. There's problems that I think are bugs not related to listen to data at name concept. But what would be even better is something along the lines of what Chris was recommending, that if that were an event I could subscribe to as a client and said, tell me when this contract emits, its standard out or the equivalent of that, or standard error. So that's one set of architecture patterns. And then the other one is, I'm a wallet client and I want to listen to the following 8 addresses, and whenever there's activity on those 8 addresses, let me know, at least during the length of my session. So does that help, Chris?
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
Robot has sort of an event mechanism which is totally insecure at present, where it looks for stuff. It listens for patterns in the log.
Got it.
But
see, that would be with this event thing that I'm describing, made a lot simpler, because you don't have to pattern match. You're looking for a very specific ID that is the event ID.
Right, and I guess it would have to be, you'd have to be able to authenticate it in some way.
What do you mean by authenticated, Jim?
Well, it would have to be signed or something so that it's not forged or something.
I'm still not following you. Who could forge it? So let me describe in a little bit more detail, and maybe this will help clarify my question about the signing and forging. So the idea is that the contract would generate, or in Roland, you would generate a unique ID, an unforgeable name, quote unquote. So that the only unforgeable name that could ever exist with that ID is the one in your contract. And you publish that. And then in the event log, you just listen for that ID to be emitted. And the only thing that could ever show up in the event log under that ID is things that particular contract sent to the event log. Does that make sense? So under that scenario, I mean, I'm assuming you're listening to you're using a node which is receiving blocks. So there's no, I don't know what you mean by sign. I don't think you need any other signers, or there's no.
I think you answered the issue.
Okay. Okay. Good.
Well,
nobody else could write to that channel.
Well, Jim, you were, yeah. If you needed this to be private or have private content, you know, if the event log wasn't completely public, then that'd be okay. But if the event log is completely public, and you wanted to prevent some listening, then you could use, you know, some sort of Diffie-Hellman encryption or something to obscure or encrypt the contents coming back.
Right. Yeah. But this is all happening on the public blockchain. So you got to remember that because that smart contract that's is running on the public chain, it's really difficult to secure. It's really difficult for it to generate data that the whole world can't see, even if programmatically only certain parts of it show up under a particular ID.
Right. So I don't think it's a Mercury thing, but in any case, right. This is only when we get to ZK snarks or something that we start considering those things.
Exactly.
So, but yeah, I love the idea
of
I love the idea of replacing listen for data at name with this kind of event subscription model.
Just to be clear, we wouldn't replace listen for data at name, because listen for data at name still has a very different use case scenario that's valid, which is you've created a channel and you want to just receive the data that's sent to that channel. That's what listen for data at name is for, and that will continue even in addition to this event stream. You think of the listen for data at name as for, I want the answer to what got sent to a specific channel, versus I want all of the events emitted from like the Rev wallet, you know, receive handler or whatever.
Right.
It might emit, you know, receive 10 revs from address foo, receive 20 revs from address bar, and just continuously emit those. And that's what you'd be listening for to build like a block explorer that's a little bit more streamlined, basically.
I think I understand.
So we have 5 minutes left. Is there anything else that I didn't talk about that you guys expected me to talk about, or any other questions or anything?
Well, I had a question that's a little off the topic of dApp developers, but is the core team going to produce a command line wallet beyond the scripts?
If sort of, well, no. Actually, let me tell you what we're going to do, and I'll ask you if this answers your question. So I mentioned at the top of the hour, we're going to change or add the ability for the R-node client to have its private keys stored securely, so password protected. And that node, then you will also be able to deploy Rolang, which you can deploy code to send transactions and whatnot. That's as close to the command line wallet that we will get.
Got it. But essentially, you need to be running in Docker or an equivalent, a Linux deployment.
True.
To
Yes.
do that. So then, kind of a related question is, what process is the co-op going to set up to claim newly minted revs out of the whatever it's called, the the rock to rev process?
So
what client will that be available on?
You will have to use either the node with the ability to send, as I just said, or something like the wallet you're building.
Yeah, I don't this is not a very comfortable answer, Chris, because most of of the rock holders, I would guess that 70% of them don't know how to stand up a Linux node or run a
node. So what you're wanting, Ed, is client side wallet, just wallet.
Yeah, and it can be simple. Command line, whatever.
That's a valid request. Right now, it's not. Nobody's tasked to build that. My opinion is that it would probably be easiest to build that using RChain API, just building one in Node. Rather than standing up a full-blown R node.
Yeah, probably true. But there'll be a lot of frustration in the community if that's not available.
Yeah, that's okay. I think now I know what you mean by a co-op delivered wallet. Yeah, that's not on the roadmap right now. We are not building that. We were hoping you would have your wallet done, Ed.
Well,
I'm just kidding. Actually, I'm not kidding. I was hoping you'd have it done, but wow.
Okay. Anyway, that's a state of understanding. That's okay. It's good to know.
Yeah, no, but it wouldn't be that hard to do. I'm wondering if we don't I'll figure out a way to get that done.
Yeah,
using RChain API.
What I'm thinking, someone has to handle the use case of getting revs onto exchanges as an example.
Well, that's different, right? So the exchange path, my understanding is that we will have conversations with exchanges, and I haven't had them, but Greg has started them, is my understanding. They will be building tooling to allow you to send to and from accounts on the exchange.
Yeah, what I meant was starting with your Ethereum private key. And
right.
Going forward.
Yeah. Let me just speak. It's the top of the hour. Do you guys have a couple more minutes?
I'm good.
I want to talk a little bit about that because that's one thing that we did change. That's one of the reasons we changed over to just using the Ethereum SEP256 K1 is that the wallet addresses, the rev addresses as part of the rock to rev conversion are derived from the public key using two steps. The first step is to convert it to what looks like an Ethereum address, and the second step is to convert it to an actual rev address. But what that allows us to do is take Ethereum addresses and actually just the public Ethereum address that's on the Ethereum chain and generate the rev address from it. And that's what's going to allow us to very easily do the rock to rev conversion without any. So basically when RChain mainnet launches, there will be a list of populated rev addresses with accounts and rev in them that you'll spend with the private key associated with the Ethereum public key.
I'm hearing you, but that doesn't make sense to me because for you to generate the process to generate a public or sort of public address in either case goes via the public key. So you need a private
Yes.
key to start or a public key to start, but you can't convert an Ethereum public address to a Rev public address unless it's the same thing, essentially.
So here's how it works.
Yeah.
You generate a key pair.
Yeah.
You take the public key, the 726K1 public key, and now we're going to convert it to a Rev address. But steps 1, 2, and 3 of that conversion process, you end up with what is the Ethereum address.
Okay.
And then you hash that one more time and add some stuff to it to make the Rev address.
Okay. It's solid now. I understand.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So when Rev people do it on the command line, they won't ever see an Ethereum address. It happens as one of the steps along the way. But under the hood, because there's an intermediary step to go through that, it allows us to do the rock to Rev by taking all those Ethereum public key addresses, the Ethereum addresses, and converting them into the Rev address, following the last couple steps of the process.
Yep, that makes perfect sense. So they still need to type in their private key to some wallet-like client.
We can't get away from that.
And there needs to be advice prior to the snapshot being taken that that wallet that's going to have rocks in it shouldn't have anything else, such as
It's got to be a raw Ethereum address. Yes.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, a virgin one for that purpose. It can't have 1,000 Ether in it.
Well, it can. That's fine if it does, but
yeah, that just puts more trust in the wallet app, which I would rather not require.
Yeah,
I'd rather warn the users.
I understand the sentiment of your comment.
Okay, cool. Cool.
Yeah.
Just advice we should give out.
Yeah, agreed. I totally agree with that.
Okay, cool.
All right. Anything else? Sorry again for my computer issue at the top of the hour.
No. Hey, Chris, this has really been great. And I wanted to ask folks if they want to meet next week and what topic do you all want to discuss? Do you need time to maybe start going out and building some things and then we could reconvene? I leave it up to you guys what you want to do.
I mean, it would be really good if we actually had people developing apps that could help each other or whatever.
Yes, I think if you could get some time from Dan, it would be awesome, and including a demo. And that might not mean that time next week. It might be at his convenience, but that would be very valuable.
I think we can. Might want to keep it on the schedule, and if we and maybe have once a month or something have a meeting until we actually have a community of app developers.
Yeah. Hey, Jim, your other collab meetings during the week, are people coming out for those, or is that tailed off a little bit?
The attendance hasn't been great. The main thing is, Josh Rolang, the consensus, and the computational calculus are well attended. The regular work studies tend to be very light unless there's something specific that people are doing.
Right. Okay. So why don't we hold off on another meeting? I'm going to reach out to Dan and I'll see what his schedule is like, and we'll put together a meeting where he could actually demo the API, and then we'll have a meeting around that. Does that sound okay to everybody?
Yeah. I mean, if we can actually do something with the API. I mean, I installed it here, waiting to do something with it today.
Yeah. Well, couldn't we run through some of Joshy's code examples? I mean, those would still work, right?
Good question. They may need to be fixed because things have changed. I don't know. We could try that. In fact, we give that a try next week.
Yeah, we could do that. So next week we'll do a live trial of the tutorials and see how that's going. Okay.
We'll see, you know, and then we'll see what state it's in, right?
Yeah, I think a demo of RChain again and a demo of the command line wallet, if those are working, would be awesome.
Yeah, I did read. Dan doesn't think RChain is going to work without some modifications at this point.
Ned, you broke up a little bit.
Sorry, Dan
Sorry.
does not think that I'm frozen. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I think it might be Ed.
Okay. So yeah, no, I did ask Dan, and he thinks RChain will not work at this point without some changes. So I'll have to take care of that.
Okay, well,
all right.
Try to find out if one of the other examples maybe work or close to working.
Okay.
Yeah, reconnected. I got dropped off at first.
Okay, welcome back. All right, cool. All right, well, I think that's it. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Chris. We really appreciated your attendance today. It was really great.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for inviting me.
All right.
Keep,
all right.
keep writing that Roland, guys.
Absolutely.
Later.
All right. Thanks,
Later.
everybody.
Bye-bye.